State calls Dr. Kelly Mills.
Thank you.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Dr. Mills, if you'll come over, and that microphone arm will swing out to let you get into the chair, and then if you'll swing it back towards you, please. Mr. Kaiser.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Would you state your name, spell your first and last name for us, and please speak up so everyone can hear you.
Kelly Marie Mills. What was the rest of the question? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my fault. I don't have the microphone. So you've stated your name. Can you spell your first and last name for us, and please speak up so everyone can hear you.
Kellymills.
Where do you work?
At the Ramsey County Medical Examiner's Office in St. Paul, Minnesota.
What's your job there?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner there.
How long have you worked there?
Over 17 and a half years.
What is your job as a medical examiner?
In the people that we serve in Ramsey County, we help determine whether individuals need to come to our office for either an autopsy or an external exam, but our ultimate job is to certify deaths with cause and manner of death, and then, if so needed, to testify in trials.
And what medical procedure is performed on the subjects of your examination in order to help you determine cause and manner of death?
An autopsy.
Now, you said that you work out of St. Paul, Ramsey County. How, if in any way, does it come to be that you would be here joining us in Hudson, in St. Croix County on a homicide case?
We also work as a referral agency to smaller counties that don't have their own facilities to perform forensic autopsies.
Is that contract work?
Some is contract work, some is not necessarily contract.
If you know, and if you don't know, that's okay. But if you know, are the services that you provided to St. Croix County in this case services for which you are personally compensated?
A physician company is personally compensated, as is Ramsey County.
I mean, you yourself personally.
No.
Is there anything about your financial relation, the physician company or Ramsey County's financial relationship with St. Croix County that would in any way affect your opinion as to cause and manner of death?
No.
Now, you said that you've been the medical examiner at Ramsey County for how long?
Over 17 and a half years.
And what is the medical specialty that you practice as the medical examiner?
Forensic pathology.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 198. I'm sorry, hang on one second. Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 148 for identification. Could you tell us what that document is, please?
This is my resume or curriculum vitae.
Is that a true and accurate summary of your training and experience?
Yes, it is.
What is a forensic pathologist?
A forensic pathologist is someone who goes through training, not only in pathology, which is studying disease, but the forensic aspect is to understand injuries and trauma as they pertain to death.
Are you board certified in forensic pathology?
Yes, I am.
And what's involved in being a board certified forensic pathologist?
First, you have to go through your, first you have to become a physician. After that, you have to do your pathology residency, which I did in anatomic pathology. I did take the board exam. I'm certified in anatomic pathology. After that, then you do a subspecialty called a fellowship, which I did in forensic pathology at Wayne County in Detroit, Michigan. And I then sat for the boards, and I am certified in forensic pathology.
Move Exhibit 148 into evidence.
Any objection?
No.
Received.
It says on Exhibit 148 that you're a diplomate of the American Board of Pathology
Yes, I am.
for anatomic pathology and forensic pathology, is that right?
Correct.
What does being a diplomate mean?
Being a diplomat is somebody who has sat for the national exams and passed.
And you're a medical doctor licensed to practice medicine, of course.
Yes, I am.
Up to this point, can you tell us approximately how many forensic examinations you've done in your career?
I can tell you I've performed over 6,000 autopsies. I have done around about specifically trauma, gunshot wound related ones, over 600 autopsies just in the state of Minnesota alone.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 150 for identification. Could you tell me what that document is, please?
This is a copy of the final autopsy protocol that I had published for the autopsy on Chase Fleichauer.
Is Exhibit 150 a true and accurate copy of your final report of the cause and manner of death of Chase Fleichauer?
Yes, it is.
The opinions you render in Exhibit 150, are they opinions rendered to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes, they are.
Knowing we're going to go through your report and talk about various aspects of it, what opinion did you render to that degree of certainty regarding the cause of death?
The cause of death was considered cerebral lacerations due to gunshot wound to the head.
And what opinion did you render as to manner of death?
Homicide.
Showing you, move Exhibit 150 in evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Gray?
No.
Received.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 149 for identification. Could you tell us what that document is, please?
This is a color printout of the PowerPoint presentation I have made for court testimony for today.
The contents of Exhibit 149 are a result of your autopsy and additional investigation regarding the death of Chase Fleichauer, the opinion of which was in Exhibit 150. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Move Exhibit 149 into evidence, asked to publish.
No objection.
Received. Granted.
Wait 1 second, Judge.
Yes.
Feel a little guilty looking for the doctor's glasses in her purse. I figured I'd better bring it to her to herself. Thank you, Doctor. PowerPoint presentation you're going to give us is a PowerPoint presentation that you prepared to help us understand how you reached the opinions you reached. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Judge, I object to this leaning as he just did.
Sustained and
Move
caution, Mr. Kaiser, jury will disregard. Ladies and gentlemen, we dimmed the lights yesterday or shut certain lights off. Does that enhance your ability to see, or would you prefer that we keep them up? You'd prefer that they go down? Thank you.
Dr. how, if in any way, is Exhibit 149 intended to be helpful to us here today?
It helps explain the physical findings that I found in Mr. Chase Fleichauer at the time of the autopsy.
Wait 1 second.
Able to see Mr. Raska?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Doctor, if you could then turn to the first portion of Exhibit 149 and tell us what those are photographs of, please.
There we go. So this,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, this first photograph, or actually two photographs, shows how Mr. Fleischauer came to the autopsy in the body bag, which is that black bag in the background. We're looking at Mr. Chase Fleischauer from the right side, and you can see his face pointed towards us with some dried blood there on his forehead and portions of his face. There's a sheet next to him that's behind him. I have just removed it so you could see his face, but it's still there in the background. And on the left, the right photograph is showing a closer up of an injury that is very apparent, which is an entrance gunshot wound on the left side of Mr. Fleischauer's face. And you can see little tiny red dots. That's called gunpowder stippling. And you can also see some purple discoloration, which is a bruise just beneath that entrance gunshot wound, as well as, which is more apparent on that right upper eyelid, a little bit more of a bruise there, but there's some there on the left as well.
We may get to it, but in the course of your work, did you come to any conclusion regarding the timing of the bruise above his left eyelid in relation to the time that the gunshot wound shown there was inflicted?
It's within the same time frame.
Did you form an opinion about whether or not the bruise itself was a consequence of the gunshot?
Yes, it can be.
Next slide then. What's shown here?
Now we are looking at Mr. Chase Fleischauer, how he came to the autopsy table, still in the sheet and the body bag. He did not have a shirt on. You can see the EKG electrodes on his torso. You can see two brown paper bags. The one that's most prominent is the left hand. We ask that all gunshot wounds, regardless of circumstances, get their hands bagged so we can preserve gunshot residue that may or may not be on hands when we know a firearm has been discharged. You can see some dried blood there on the left arm of Mr. Fleischauer. And you can see he's wearing jeans and a brown belt as well.
Thank you. Are there any other observations you want to bring to our attention on what appears to be right now marked Exhibit 144B?
No.
Thanks. What are we seeing on the next portion of your PowerPoint, which has the label Exhibit 144C?
Mr. Fleischauer was not wearing shoes, but he was wearing the socks that you're seeing in the two images. The one on your left is actually the bottom of the right sock of Mr. Chase Fleischauer, and you can see blood on the bottom of that particular sock. And the other photograph on your right is showing the left sock, the bottom of that as well. And I'm sure you can see two little dark holes kind of at the pad of the foot in that left sock, bottom of the left sock.
Doctor, when you saw the blood on the bottom of Chase Fleischauer's socks, what if any conclusion did you reach regarding when in relation to the gunshot that he received, he would have been in a position to have gotten that blood on his socks.
Getting the blood on the bottom of the socks indicates that Mr. Chase Fleischauer was able to walk and was not significantly, I don't want to say impaired, unable to do so. So at some point, there's blood that he is walking over, and that's how it's contracted onto the bottom of the sock. So it occurred prior to the gunshot wound.
Thank you, Doctor. What's shown in what is displayed to us as Exhibit 144D.
Now we're looking at the bottom of Mr. Fleischauer's socks after I removed them from his body. And you can see the right sock is on the left side and the left sock is on the right side. And you can see a little bit more of the blood on both the pad, the toes, and the heel on both socks. And it's probably a little bit more difficult to see the hole, 2 holes on the bottom of the left sock because they're white.
Were they pretty close together, though?
Yes, they were.
Thank you. And what are we seeing in the frame now that's labeled 144E in your PowerPoint?
Now this is similar to the first 2 photos that you saw on the one slide. Again, we're looking at Mr. Chase Fleischauer from the right side on the photograph on the left, and you can now clearly see the red-purple contusion around the gunshot wound defect that the blue arrow is pointing at. It's a little bit more difficult in that particular photograph to see the amount of gunpowder stippling that is on the left side of the forehead. That also involved the left eyelid, the left periorbital region, and a little bit on his nose as well. There's a grayscale that's actually on his nose, and that's just below a small bluish purple contusion, which he had on the bridge of his nose. He also, if you go to the other photograph on the right side, this is a closer up image showing, again, the hole, which is black on your photograph, above the areas where it says bruises with the 2 arrows pointing to it. What you can also see is the grayscale is on the left cheekbone beneath the left eye, and a little hint of a red contusion there on the left nostril. And it's hard for me to see if you see anything else, but there should be contusions you're able to appreciate of the left upper eyelid as well as that right upper eyelid.
The contusion to the left upper eyelid you're identifying as being separate from the sort of black and blue area under the gunshot?
That is correct, yes.
Even when it's cleaned up, are you still not able to distinguish whether or not the black and blue area under the gunshot would have happened simultaneously with the gunshot or before it?
Check to that, Your Honor, she's already testified to that, and he's leading.
Well, it's a different.
It is leading, sustained.
How, if in any way, is this photograph labeled 144E different from the photograph we saw when the bag and the sheet were there?
The surface of the skin has been cleaned up now, so there's no dried blood. That will hinder the ability to see that the bruise that was in the original photograph appeared a little smaller. Now you can see that it's a bit larger, which is about 3.5 inches.
What, if any, injuries that you've identified to us here in what is labeled 144E, what, if any, of those injuries are you able to form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty happened immediately prior to the gunshot? In other words, they're not a consequence of the gunshot.
You can see the 2 contusions on the nose. Those are not related to the gunshot wound, so those existed prior to being shot, as well as there's some faint contusions on the left cheek that we'll discuss later, but there's about 3 of them that are on that left cheek region and jawline as well that occurred prior and does not have anything to do with the gunshot wound.
And what about the, what did you identify as being in the eyelids?
There were,
After this is repetitious, she's already testified to it.
Sustained.
Whatever it was the record reflects about the eyelids, can you tell us to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether those injuries occurred when the gunshot happened or in the immediate period of time just before it?
they are likely as a result of the gunshot wound.
Are there any other areas of his body in these photographs in 144E that you'd like to describe to us before we move on?
You can see in that left photograph, if you look at Mr. Fleischauer's lower lip, on the, it'd be the right side of his lower lip, this deep purple color, that's a contusion abrasion. And I don't believe you can see anything else. There's a faint bruise on the upper lip. The philtrum is what it is called. It's the actual skin surface between the nose and the lips proper. You cannot really visualize that in this particular photograph, but there is a bruise there as well.
Now, you called it stippling. Can you describe to us what the stippling is?
Yes, when we're evaluating a gunshot wound, what we're looking at are things aside from the projectile itself that exit the end of the barrel of the weapon. And what that is you can get flame from the combustion of the gunpowder itself. You can also get the smokiness or soot, which is the combusted gunpowder, which leaves a little gray-black material on a target that it strikes if it's within a close enough range. And the gunpowder stippling itself is the unburned gunpowder actually leaving the end of the barrel of the weapon, striking the skin, causing little tiny micro abrasions, or like a sandblasting if you're behind a car that's on gravel that's kicking up small stones and you get little tiny abrasions on your skin. It's a similar concept.
The portion of the head that the stippling is seen in, would it be fair to... Is that a flat surface?
No, it is a curved surface.
Thanks, Doctor. Unless you have anything else in this thing marked Exhibit 144E, if we could move on to the next slide.
The one thing that isn't, that we talked about the end of the barrel, what things we're looking for our gunshot wound, is you do not see soot in this particular photograph at all, and I didn't see it in any of my photographs either. If you look at the edges on that, of the gunshot wound entrance, on that photograph on your right, you can see a nice red injury between the skin edge and the underlying soft tissue. There's no grayish or blackish material in those wound edges. I did not appreciate that with my gross eye.
Thank you. What are we seeing and what is displayed to us as Exhibit 144F?
Now, these are three different photographs of the left eye, and the photograph on your left is me pulling down the left upper eyelid, and you can see these little tiny red freckles as well. That's not gunpowder stippling. Those are little tiny bruises or extravasated red blood cells, if you will. We call them Petechiae. They don't relate to the gunshot wound, so they occurred prior to being shot. The photograph in the middle is showing what we call the conjunctiva of the left upper eyelid. So I've taken the eyelid and inverted it. There's some there. I'm not sure how well you can actually see them yourself, but again, the small red tiny freckles, little tiny bruises under the eye, pinpoint bruises. And you can see a bruise on the left lower eyelid as well, that little purplish discoloration. The photograph on the right, I am now pulling the left lower eyelid upward to attempt to show you the small tiny red freckles or petechiae, the pinpoint contusions there on the left lower eyelid. Again, they do not have anything to do with the gunshot wound, and they occurred before Mr. Chase Fleichauer was shot.
Can you say to a reasonable degree of medical certainty approximately how long before?
No, I cannot. It's in that very short time frame, but I can't tell you exactly.
Less than a day?
Yes,
Could it have been less than a couple hours?
that is possible.
What do the,
Judge, I move to strike the last answer as
Sustained,
possible.
and doctor, all of your opinions that you're going to render have to be within a reasonable degree of certainty within your field as opposed to possibilities, okay?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Would that be stricken, Your Honor?
It is. Jury will disregard.
to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, approximately how long before the gunshot did the petechiae and the other injuries you've identified so far as having occurred before the gunshot happened?
Objected that, Your Honor, she already said she couldn't tell.
Doctor, has your opinion changed from that which you originally offered?
No, it has not,
Thank
just
you.
prior.
Question?
Based on your examination, do you have a reasonable degree of medical certainty opinion as to the cause of the petechiae?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
When we're looking at petechiae, we are trying to evaluate what are potential causes of them, and there are a few different types. One is having pressure around the neck or having direct contact with the neck, which Mr. Chase Fleischauer does have some abrasions on the left side of his neck as well as the back left side of his neck, which you haven't seen yet. But there are other ways of obtaining petechiae as well. Prolonged strenuous activity such as a woman going through labor. It's constant bearing down and increased pressure, so prolonged fight can do it as well. In rare cases, you can get it in some CPR instances.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next slide? What are we seeing here in 144G?
These are two photographs showing the right eye of Mr. Chase Fleischauer, and on the photograph on the left, I am pulling down his right upper eyelid, trying to show you the tiny red pinpoint contusions or petechiae of the right upper eyelid. You can see a little bit of the hint of the bruising on that right upper eyelid. And on the photograph on the right, I am pulling down the left lower eyelid to show the conjunctiva, and I believe you can see pretty clearly at least two of the tiny red pinpoint contusions there. Again, that is petechiae. They do not have anything to do with the gunshot wound, and they did occur before Mr. Chase Fleischauer was shot.
Thank you. What are we seeing here in what's identified as 144H?
Now we are looking at the left side of Mr. Chase Fleischauer's neck with his left ear being pulled up towards the ceiling by two blue gloved fingers there. You can see bruising, that purple area or discoloration on the back of his left ear that extends to the back of the head. And then if you look at the reddish purple linear or line-like abrasion there on the left side of his neck, that's an abrasion. And that's what I was talking about at the last time about potential for petechiae.
Could you describe for us what you mean by the abrasion that you have labeled on 144H's relationship to the petechiae?
The abrasion there on Mr. Chase Fleischauer's left neck indicates that there is something on the neck on that particular area. It doesn't show necessarily, it's not on the front of the neck. There might be some relationship, however, they may not be related.
So, Judge,
Did-
excuse me, Your Honor, I object to that, but she's saying that she has no opinion.
Sustained.
Thank you. Move it be stricken.
That portion is stricken. Jury will disregard.
Do you have an opinion as to the approximate time in relation to the gunshot wound to the victim's to Mr. Kayle Fleischauer's head that the injury there labeled as an abrasion occurred?
It occurred prior to Mr. Chase Fleischauer's gunshot wound, in, again, a short period of time, sometime that same day.
Based on your training and experience, can you tell us what actions or objects you've seen, trained, know about, or in your many thousands of autopsies know of that could cause the thing you have labeled as an abrasion?
It could be a fingernail.
move to strike that, Your Honor, if it isn't beyond, it could be anything.
Well, again, Doctor, if you will frame all of your responses to a reasonable degree of certainty in your field as a forensic medical examiner, so was that opinion regarding a fingernail to that degree of proof?
It is consistent with a fingernail.
Thank you.
Does
Mr.
that
Kaiser?
mean, Your Honor, that, excuse me. does
To a
that mean-
reasonable degree of certainty?
Yes.
Thank you.
The injury you have labeled as a contusion, can you describe that for us? And if you know what the cause of that is to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
What I can tell you is that's called blunt force trauma. I can't tell you the object that caused it. I just know that was the location where something had struck the left ear. There's also a contusion or bruise on the front of the left ear as well.
Is there anything else you want to talk to us about on 144H?
No.
Okay, can we move on to the next one then? What are we seeing here and what's labeled as 144I?
On the photograph on the left, we are looking at the left cheek and jawline of Mr. Chase Fleischauer, and I've shaved parts of his facial stubble away. The ruler is kind of along the lower part of the jaw on the left side, and you can see the two arrows are pointing at two faint, kind of squared off U-shaped bruises or contusions. And then just above the ruler, you see a little red dot. That's a small abrasion or a skin scrape. And next to the word contusion is an ill-defined red contusion or bruise.
So, Doctor, I'm clear on the orientation. To the top then would be the back of the neck and the right ear near that corner?
What we would be
Or
looking
left
at,
ear.
it should be, so the bottom, the vertical part of the ruler that we're looking at on the left is
Yeah.
going along the left jawline. You see towards the horizontal part of the ruler, there's a little black thing. That's the corner of the left side of the mouth.
Thank you.
As to the left side of what we were looking at called Exhibit 144I, the photo on the left side, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when the contusion and pattern contusions occurred in relation to the gunshot?
They occurred before the gunshot wound.
Did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when those injuries occurred in relation to the other injuries that you've told us so far occurred before the gunshot wound? In other words, would they have been at the same time?
Yes.
Up in the upper top, just a little bit to the left, along the neck in the left side photo of 144H, could you tell us, if you can, what that red line is?
That is another angle from that linear abrasion we saw on the left side of Mr. Chase Fleischauer's neck.
Could you tell us again about the injury, tell us what the injuries are that you've displayed in the photograph on the right side of what we're calling Exhibit 144I?
What we're looking at there is I'm pulling down the lower lip to show more of the internal injuries that Mr. Chase Fleischauer had on the left lower mucosa. You can see one of the arrows that says contusion. There are two bruises there. And then you have an arrow that says contusion and lacerations going towards more of the midline of the lower lip. There's bruising and small little cuts, almost like cuts, but they're not. They're from blunt force. And then on the right side, which is the lower part of the photograph there, that's that purplish contusion abrasion we saw in another photograph.
Doctor, could you tell us what the difference would be between, if there is one, between bruises and contusions?
They are the same.
How do the thing that we either call a bruise or a contusion, how does that come to appear so that one can see it?
The blood has to come out of the underlying vessels that have been damaged, so they kind of leak out into the surrounding tissue, the fat, the underlying fat or subcutaneous tissues, and then we can see the colors, red, blue, or purple, for a recent contusion there with our naked eye.
How, if in any way, does that blood flow to those places, if at all, once a person is deceased?
It does not.
Did you form an opinion as to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when the contusions and lacerations you've identified on the right side of Exhibit 144I occurred in relation to the gunshot wound?
They occurred before Mr. Chase Fleischauer was shot.
Can you tell us whether or not, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, they would have been consistent in timing with the other injuries that you say occurred before he was shot?
Yes, they are in the similar time frame. Yes.
Anything else in 144I we should look at before we move on?
No.
Thank you. In what is now marked as Exhibit 144J, again, power of the PowerPoint, could you tell us what injuries you are having us be able to see here?
I am demonstrating some contusions or abrasions on the right index finger of Mr. Chase Fleischauer, and you can see the top left photograph is showing another linear abrasion there going across the back of the right index finger. The bottom left photograph is just showing more from a sort of front side angle of that right index finger. And the photograph on the right is showing a separate contusion abrasion on the lateral aspect of the right index finger.
Did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty when the injuries depicted in what is called Exhibit 144J occurred in relation to the gunshot wound?
They occurred prior to the gunshot wound.
Would they have occurred, if you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, would they have occurred at or around the same time as the other injuries you've described to us occurred before the gunshot wound?
Yes, they did.
Thank you. Anything else you want to describe to us in 144J before we move on?
No.
Thank you. What are we seeing here in what's labeled Exhibit 144K?
The photograph on the left is showing the back of Mr. Chase Fleischauer's right forearm, and you can see the elbow kind of just above that gray scale on the right side of it, if you will. The little red area, that's an abrasion. If your eye goes towards the middle of that particular photograph, you see some red discoloration. That's a bruise on the back of Mr. Fleischauer's right forearm. So it's on the back of it, not the front. This is the back. The photograph on the right is showing a very faint, I believe for you to see, red abrasion on the top of Mr. Chase Fleischauer's right foot.
Sticking with the foot for a minute, when you received him, he had socks on, is that correct?
That is correct.
The photograph on the left here in 144K showing the right forearm, if you recall, was that cleaned up at all before you were able to do this examination?
This photograph is cleaned up. Yes.
As to the constellation of injuries shown here, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when the injuries on the back of his right forearm and his right foot occurred in relation to when he was shot?
Yes, they occurred prior to the gunshot wound.
And did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not these injuries in what is labeled as 144K occurred at or around the same time as the other injuries which you've already described to us having occurred before he was shot?
Judge, I object to that. Confusing, I don't know.
Do you understand the question, Doctor?
I do.
Thank you. You can answer.
Yes, they occurred around the same time.
Thank you. Anything else in what's called 144K we need to look at before we move on?
No.
Thank you. The item labeled now Exhibit 144L in the PowerPoint, could you tell us what you're disclosing to us here?
We are looking at the left side of the torso and left upper arm of Mr. Chase Fleischauer. He's been cleaned up again. You can see what I've marked as abrasions at the top of the photo on the left side of Mr. Chase Fleischauer's chest. On the back of the left upper arm, it's a very faint, two parallel linear pattern contusions. And then on the left elbow, you can see an abrasion or a skin scrape. And if you look at the left side of the neck, below the left ear, if you see that up in the top right, you can see that linear abrasion on his neck again.
What's the difference between an abrasion? What might a person who's not a doctor call an abrasion?
It's similar to like a rug burn. You're missing little bits of layers of skin at that point in time.
Could it be a scratch?
It could be a scratch as well,
Jack,
yes.
move the strike, Your Honor.
Sustained, leading.
Could you tell us then what the difference is between an abrasion and a contusion?
A contusion is a damaged vessel that leaks out blood that we can see beneath the surface of the skin, but the skin proper itself is intact. It's just damage beneath that layer. An abrasion or skin scrape is one where parts of the surface of the skin themselves have been damaged and parts of that element have been removed. Very superficial layers, but it's, if you fall right here on a carpet, you get a rug burn, similar to that.
What, if anything, would a person get if a person were to take their fingernail and run it along their face?
You would get a linear abrasion, which is also called a scratch.
Based on your training and experience, does the fact that you've identified the pattern contusions and abrasions as having parallel lines to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, what, if anything, does that indicate to you?
That something cylindrical caused that particular pattern bruise. If that table that you're looking at in front of where this lady is, the stenographer is seated, if that was rounded, it would be somewhat consistent with something like that.
Did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when the injuries displayed in what's labeled as Exhibit 144L occurred in relation to the gunshot wound?
They occurred prior to the gunshot wound.
Did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not the injuries displayed in what is called Exhibit 144L occurred at about the same time as the other injuries that you've identified to us occurred before the gunshot?
Yes, they're around that same time.
Anything else in 144L you'd like to look at before we move on?
No.
Thank you. In the portion of your PowerPoint labeled Exhibit 144M, could you tell us what we're looking at here?
3 separate photographs showing separate injuries to the left arm of Mr. Chase Fleischauer. The photograph on the left is showing above that little gray scale, the back of the left forearm, there's another abrasion, that little purplish area right above the gray scale. And then if you look more towards the middle, where it starts narrowing down, there's a purple contusion there as well. The photograph in the middle is showing the inner aspect of the left upper arm, which is right beneath the armpit. So if I put my arm out, you're looking here on the inner part of my left upper arm, there's an abrasion. Now, if we look at the photograph on the right, you should see 3 separate contusions. The most faint one is right above the grayscale towards the ceiling. It's very, very small. I can try to use the pointer.
No.
No. So it's very, very small, and it's almost towards the edge of the forearm or wrist there. If you go to the opposite side, where you can see a lot more red-purple, and then there's tiny superimposed dark maroon, those are skin scrapes on top of, or abrasions on top of a bruise. That's the most significant bruise there. But then if you go up to the a little bit more towards the ceiling and to the left, at the edge of the photo, you can see part of another purple contusion there as well.
The ones, doctor, that you said were faint, for those of us who may not be able to see what you were talking about, would you be able to walk down to the screen to your right and point to out where they are to the jury?
Yes.
I think they can all see where those are.
So here's the faint one, right in this area.
And Doctor, if you can keep your voice up, because the stenographer still has to take your testimony.
So the faint one, which is very hard to see because I have to get it almost in front of it, it's the one above the grayscale and off towards almost the edge of the lateral aspect of the left forearm. The large one we described here, you can see the full range of contusion with overlying abrasions. And then the third one, which is off to the edge which is facing the jury here, you can see another contusion.
Thank you. What do you mean when you say that there's a scratch on top of the contusion in the right photograph?
Oh, that just means there's an injury superimposed on top of a contusion.
As to all of these contusions and abrasions shown in what is called Exhibit 144M, did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when those occurred in relation to the gunshot?
Yes, they occurred prior to the gunshot wound.
Did you form an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to when the injuries in 144M occurred in relation to the other injuries that you've already identified to us as having occurred prior to the gunshot?
They're around the same time as well.
Is there any other aspect of the photographs in 144M that we should discover before we move on?
No.
Thanks, Doctor. In 144N, could you tell us what we're looking at here?
Now we've moved to the internal part of the autopsy, and an incision is performed called from ear to ear, so kind of behind the head, but ear to ear, and the scalp has been reflected over the face. That's your standard autopsy procedure. So Mr. Chase Fleischauer would be lying in front of you with his nose going towards the ceiling. That's the orientation of this particular photograph on the left. And what I'm showing is some dark maroon color, which is hemorrhage, called subgaleal hemorrhage, or beneath the scalp. They're right next to that blue circle that I have. The blue circle is indicating there are a separate core, bullet core, as well as a separated jacket port fragment there in the subgaleal tissue. The circle's kind of obscuring the entrance gunshot wound there on the left forehead, but you will see it in subsequent photos. And if you look at that photograph on the left, you can see another area of subgaleal or bleeding hemorrhage there on that tissue there closest to the left lower part of the photograph. The photograph on the right, we are now looking at Mr. Chase Fleischauer. He's still on his back, so his nose is up towards the ceiling, but we're looking from his left side now. Again, the scalp has been reflected, and what you can see is with more of the subgaleal tissue or scalp reflected, you can see more areas of subgaleal hemorrhage or deep red purple hemorrhage that are covered in both the arrows that you can see there on that top, that the two are going to the left side. Now you have an entrance gunshot wound that's very difficult to see in this particular photo, but there are others that will follow. It's just giving you an orientation of where that gunshot wound is located. Again, my grayscale is there, and at the bottom left of that grayscale, you can see bruising or subgaleal hemorrhage again, going through the layers of the fat of the skin, which is how a bruise is formed. And on the right side of that photograph, you see an arrow pointing to what is labeled as a linear skull fracture there. That's difficult for me to see from this level, but I know we have more to show later.
Thank you. So why don't we move on and look at a couple of those other pictures?
And
Thank you.
counsel, before we move on, let's take a brief recess, ladies and gentlemen. Don't form any opinion of any discussion. Start your deliberations, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
All